Hey, Matt. Can you hear me okay? Wait, I'm just getting my audio sorted out here. Matt, can you hear me? I can't hear you. So I don't know if that's me or not. What about Todd?
I can hear you and see you, no problem. I can
Okay.
see Matt's lips moving, but I can't hear him. So I think it's a Matt microphone problem.
It's not a Michael issue, it's a Matt issue.
Correct.
Good. Still nothing there, bud.
How's that? Is that better?
Oh yeah, there you go. Very good.
Go.
And can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we ready to go, Mr. Todd? How are we doing for attendees?
You are at 25, 26 people. I'd say it is just past the hour. You could start, or you could give people another 2 to 3 minutes, but I would say you've got 24 out of the 40 or so that had indicated they would probably attend. So you could start whenever you're ready, I think.
Right.
Just a reminder for everyone before you start this session, then all sessions this weekend are being recorded. It will record video, audio, and text chats as we go through the day. So just do be mindful of the fact this session is being recorded.
That's great. So I'm going to pass it off to Matt in a sec here to kick it off. But I'm Michael Magnan from the City of Calgary and President-elect for the board this year. Matt's going to be just giving a quick introduction of sort of the genesis of this and go through the agenda for tomorrow or for today. And then I'm going to give a brief presentation, and then Matt's going to sort of facilitate a brainstorming session around the charter. So why don't I hand it off to you, Matt? Todd, I can't see the chat because I've got my screen shared right now. So if people have questions, feel free to jump in and just interrupt us so that we can answer that stuff. So over to you, Matt.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michael. Welcome everyone to the first part of the AGM, and sort of a separate item really onto its own. We're pretty excited about doing this. This kind of the genesis of this came from last year's AGM when we had the presentation from John around the Canadian Landscape Charter, and it was a pretty inspiring talk. He's very passionate about the work that he's done to create the Landscape Charter, and we were all very fortunate to have him out and to be able to listen to what the work that's gone into this. And so we felt like I personally felt like it was a very important thing to carry forward with the recommendation that regional landscape charters start to become established across the country, and as the next step towards really understanding and articulating the values and of our that we hold within our landscapes and the values that we hold within ourselves in the stewardship of them. So that's something that's been in the works. We've been talking about it. This is the first conversation that we'll really have more broadly about what we want to do with this. It's fairly open-ended. So we're really happy that there's this much interest in it today, and that we can have a really good conversation around what we want, how do we want to approach this, and what we want our next steps to be. So to facilitate this conversation, I've posted a link in the chat. It's for a mural, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a kind of online whiteboard, sticky board kind of thing. So we'll use that to facilitate the brainstorming session. It's fairly straightforward. Once we get into it, I'll maybe give everybody a rundown. But if you can, click on that link, try to pull it up, and hopefully it's working for everybody. Then once we switch into that, we can get everybody oriented, and it's really user friendly. So I'm sure you'll be able to sort it out quite effectively. We've been using it for engagements in these strange times that we find ourselves in. But so I was going to do around just see about introductions. There's quite a few people around here. It might take a bit of time to go through it, but I think it's worthwhile. I think it'll help us in the brainstorming session just to know who's here and what your your interest is in this. It doesn't have to be a long speech or anything, but I think it's worthwhile so that everybody kind of gets a feel for who's around this. I was going to say the table, but around their computers. But connected to us here. So I'm going to run through it, and I'm just going to say your name, and if you could, you don't have to turn your camera on if you don't want to, but just say a couple things. Sharif?
Hi, I'm Sharif Barsoum, a landscape architect working in the city of Edmonton. I'm just joining as I was already in past a member of IFLA. So I'm very interested in this subject and to know and understand everything about it.
Thanks, Sharif. John Kozak? Okay, I'm going to skip you, John, and go to Michael Fishman. Okay, I'm going to skip you, Michael, and I'm going to go to Stephanie.
Hi there, Matt. How's it going today?
Good, thanks. Yeah.
Well, I'm just here to kind of glean a bit of LAT perspective on the charter from our industry's point of view. So I'm very interested to see this advance more. It's exciting.
Great. Well, thanks, Stephanie. Lee Hedgedoran. If I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, you're close. Hagedorn. Lee, I'm an architect with ISL Engineering, and interested in this, like you said, as a follow-up to last year's Canadian Charter discussions. So look forward to it.
Great. Thanks, Lee. Mojan.
Hi, I'm Mojan Molanapur. I'm a landscape architect with IBI Group. I'm excited to see how this brainstorming session is going to go.
Thanks. Chelsea Allen. Okay, Caitlin Woods. Okay, well, what I'll do maybe is just introduce everybody that's here. Everyone's feeling a little stage fright. We've got Caitlin, Adrian Van Corp is here, Shannon Reed, Allison Matthews, Tara Cullum, Ernie Webster, hey Ernie, Atsuko Big, Will Packlight, Andrew Kennedy, Jason Bennett, Sharif, lost track here, Jennifer, Asha, Jennifer Cope, Mary Quinlan, hello, Amala, hello, Derek, hello, John Kozak, Jenna and Zoe, shouldn't you guys be working? No, just kidding. Thanks everyone for joining us, and please, this is I don't know how this is going to work in terms of the dialogue amongst each other, but this is meant to be a brainstorming session when we get to it. So we're hoping that we can get some good dialogue going through the mural and see where it takes us. But we've got 2 hours together. It might not take the full 2 hours. But Michael, do you want to take it back over and walk us through this front end?
Absolutely. So when Matt and I were kind of going through our ideation stage for this session, we thought it'd be worthwhile to just kind of go over what a landscape charter is, a little bit about kind of what's become a more or less a global initiative around landscape charters and is slowly trickling down into other component associations. And then Matt's mural brainstorming session that we talked about. And really, I think the purpose of today is this is step 2. I consider the AGM last year as kind of step 1 when Jean presented his Canadian landscape charter presentation, which was quite good. So we wanted to build on that. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump in. If people have comments, just maybe Matt, you can monitor them, or Todd in the chat, and feel free to just jump in if you guys have questions. So, okay, so what is a landscape charter? This is me summarizing things because there's no real clear definition of it. But I think really it's just a declaration that recognizes the importance of our landscapes. And more importantly, it's also a call to action to the signatories to sort of follow what is written in the charter. Typically, what we see in the environmental scan of the various charters is just a recognition that landscapes are vital, that they're also very diverse. So it's really hard to tackle this on a global scale because of the diversity that we see. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more later. There's typically a statement of core principles, or sort of our beliefs as signatories. There's that invitation to sign and become a signatory, and the Canadian Landscape Charter, the version on the CSLA's website actually has the list of signatories that signed the initial one. So I enjoy kind of going through that and seeing a lot of fellows from our profession who have already kind of committed to it. And then there's really a commitment to strategic actions. So this doesn't need to be a long document. It doesn't need to be arduous, but I think having gone through a lot of engagement projects where we do setting goals and visions and things like that, it does take time, and it's not something that an individual alone can author. It truly needs to come from, in this case, our membership is initiating it, and even maybe looking broader at some of the initiatives that we'll have. So that'll really be the sort of discussion today. Really, this is just a timeline that was taken from CSLA's really helpful link on the International Landscape Convention. The link is below, so you can type that in, or maybe Matt can paste it into the chat or something like that. But it's interesting, in 2006 at an IFLA conference, the idea of a global landscape charter really emerged. Over the next few years, it started to get looked at on a global scale, and UNESCO had a working group that looked at it. And I think the USA and France and some other signatories had a few challenges around a global approach because of that diversity of landscapes and just political spectrums, and even just the way that things like charters are drafted. I think there was some jurisdictional sort of obstacles. I wasn't a part of this conversation, so maybe other folks can chime in and add more to it. But you see at 2010, there's this commitment from UNESCO to really take a bottom-up approach based on regions. So that created a flurry of different types of charters and declarations. You can see New Zealand, Australia, the Latin American chapters of, or the Latin American region of IFLA, the Asia Pacific region of IFLA, in the first 2 years following that UNESCO review, led to the Canadian Landscape Charter, or CLC as it's called quite often. If you see that term, that's what it means, in 2015. And then last year, as we said earlier, Jean was here at our AGM and presented the Canadian Landscape Charter, but really challenged us to develop a regional charter, which is why we're here today. So that's, again, the link to the CSLA's charter there. It's fairly easy to find online. The link is a bit of a handful, so you're best to just Google it. And feel free to peruse through it through today's session, because I'm really just summarizing it. They're usually broken into 4 parts, for the most part, these charters. So the preamble for CSLA recognizes that we are a professional organization of landscape architecture. CSLA and us as members are really the voice of the profession in our industry. Although I do challenge the team today to really think about who else might want to sign a regional landscape charter. I personally believe that we can't do this alone. Although we're the voice, there's a lot of industry allies and a lot of allied professions that should be at the table with us. You know, the CSLA is dedicated to raising awareness and appreciation and providing leadership for being stewards of our landscapes. So it makes sense that they kind of have a charter to direct our actions and our commitment to the landscape and the environment and all those things. The CSLA also recognized that landscapes are of immense value to the public and really do contribute a lot to our quality of life, which is why I think we have such a great profession. Huge socioeconomic and cultural value. And also landscapes are in flux. They're not static things. We know this, but with a lot of the changes that are happening to, you know, climate and migration patterns and development patterns and all those things, our landscapes are under stress, you know, environmentally, socially, and economically, which is the whole triple bottom line to sustainable development approach. They broke the next section into some core principles. And there's a little bit of text in the charter that you can read for each of the 4 principles, or the five principles, but really landscapes are vital. They consider all people, so recognizing the diversity of our population. Landscapes, our profession or the charter can also inspire stewardship of the landscape. And I think that's where I was referring to some of our allied professions and other industries. We also have a role to expand knowledge of the landscape and to really show leadership. On a regional scale, I think having a regional charter is a first step towards showing leadership. So essentially the next piece of the charter was recognizing that by signing the charter, you acknowledge that landscapes are essential. You acknowledge the responsibilities of our profession as well as our allies. You adopt some of the core principles of the charter, and you support really the elaboration, execution, promotion of the strategic plan. So there's 3 documents in the charter. There's the actual charter itself, there's the strategic plan, and I forget what the third one is. I think it's the initiative, just a description of the initiative in depth. But CSLA's got a pretty good website on this. I encourage you guys to go back and look at some of these charters, and maybe we'll peruse through them today, or if there's elements of these charters as we discussed today, feel free to just copy and paste it into the chat, or turn on your camera and share what you like about some of these other charters. So that really that sets the context for what charters are and why they exist, and what the kind of environmental scan looks like. CSLA recognized through their initiative that the vastness of Canada and the diversity that we have here, as well as some of our historical diversity, means that bottom-up approach that IFLA promoted really does make a lot of sense, which means it starts to get placed on, the onus gets placed onto some of our component associations of CSLA. You know, I think something that Matt and I want to discuss today is this an Alberta charter? Is this a Prairies charter? Is it a Western Canada charter? You know, how do we want to break it up, and who would we talk to? about that. So I think some of the discussion points that we'll have today, and Matt's got this all outlined in his mural brainstorming session. You know, what are the boundaries of the region? Who should we have signing it? What allied disciplines do we want to chat with? Todd and I had a great chat about this at the ARPA conference a couple weeks back, and you know, he's indicated that a lot of other industry associations are really keen to talk to us about stuff like this. So we talked about LANTA and other component associations, and you know, engineering and architecture, and all these folks that we work with on a day-to-day basis. I think we'll also want to differentiate how a regional charter might be different than the Canadian Landscape Charter. Do some brainstorming around our core principles. And then really, I think the crux of today is, what are the next steps? So how will we action that? I believe that's the end of my presentation, Matt. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it back to you. And I guess feel free to ask questions before we get into that, if anyone has anything.
Sure. Yeah, I guess as I'll get, now would be a good time for everyone to try that mural link. What I'll end up doing is sharing my screen too for anybody who can't access it for whatever reason. We can try to troubleshoot, but at least you'll be able to see what the activity is. But I encourage you to try it, and because it's quite an effective and easy tool to use. And so if you can start trying to get into that, and then Todd's going to say a few things here to encourage us.
Well, not encourage. I'm going to explain allow full participation. So those of you that are experiencing, first of all, most of you probably can't find the link because unless you're in the full version of Zoom, you can't see the chat, which is one of our learnings today. So what we're going to need to what we're going to do is, if you're in the feed loop system and you haven't already discovered this, right below the picture box, there is a little tiny link that says experiencing issues ? Click here for more options. If you click that, it will let you jump to the full version of Zoom, and that will give you the full suite of opportunities. It'll allow you to chat. It'll allow you to access the link and see what Matt was talking about. So if you are having difficulties with your audio or your video, or you want to use the chat picture or see the chat pictures, just click that gray box below and it'll let you jump out to the full version of Zoom on your computer. So I just wanted to jump in with that real quick to support folks that are having a bit of trouble. Thanks to both Mala and Chelsea who helped us figure that out. And I'll be adding that to the notes for tomorrow. So thanks all of you for being the guinea pigs and helping us break the system on the first day so that we can do better tomorrow when we have 150 of you. Other than that, I'm going to jump back off and let you carry on.
This is also good for us to make sure that we always tell Todd what we're doing. So while everyone's kind of working that through, we've got time, so there's no pressure here. I'll introduce everybody to the mural a little bit and what we've got. So you can see it's basically just like a large whiteboard. You can zoom in and you know, kind of work around it on your own. Anybody can just do this, and you can you know, work through it at your leisure, or you can kind of follow along. I can actually, I think, summon everybody, and everybody would be following me, and they'll follow my screen as I go along. But you can also just zoom around and do what you want, and I think you can see people's cursors as they move along. You can see what people are doing. We structured this in a few different ways. So always on the side, we've got the ability to read what the landscape charter is, and this is the basics of the charter that I've just copied and pasted into here. The main principles, you know, so taking a step from the preamble into what this is. So recognizing landscapes is vital, considering all people, inspiring stewardship, expanding knowledge, showing leadership. And there's subpoints there, so you can explore this here as you like. Then, you know, the next step here is really what is a regional landscape charter. And so I'll just read this because it helps to kind of set the stage as to what we're trying to achieve with this initiative, and what we want to try to get out of this brainstorm. Mike had questions posted there, and those questions are just a variation of them we have over here in the brainstorming session. But So from the perspective of the CSLA, a regional landscape charter integrates the objectives, principles, goals, and philosophy of the CLC into an instrument which expresses the physical, social, historical, and cultural particularities of a specific region. A regional landscape charter must represent the expression of one or more regional component associations of the CSLA. It's based on regional values, principles, policies, and specificities. The charter might be approved or engage other regional organizations that share the same interest. On a smaller scale, a charter could refer to a distinct area of a province or territory where communities integrate the philosophy of the CLC into an instrument that aims to protect and manage the specific landscape. Those instruments result in communities' active participation. So within that, we've pulled out some broad themes and broad questions. And these are about, first off, what is our regional landscape or landscapes? Are we talking about, as Mike said, a prairie landscape charter, a Western landscape charter? Are we defining it by, ecozone? Are we defining it by range, where we have distinctive landscape qualities? How specific do we want to be with this? How broad do we want to be with this? Do we want to initiate multiple regional landscape charters within Alberta, or within or stretching out into Saskatchewan, BC, Manitoba, further to the north? Are there distinct regions that we do need to address specifically rather than broadly? I think the first inclination is, say, regional. Well, and we're Alberta Association of Landscape Architects, but we all know as landscape architects that landscapes aren't defined by our jurisdictional boundaries and stretch across borders. So how do we want to discuss our region and a charter or multiple charters within this area? The next question is, who belongs to our regional landscape? Who should the signatories be? And are we including allied disciplines? And questions around what is important to our natural heritage, what is important to our cultural heritage, and what are our values, principles, policies that we need to stitch into this, weave into this, or build on. And then I just have a kind of a dumping ground for other ideas. And so the intent would be, as people get connected to this, that on the left-hand side, there are tools. You can draw shapes, you can add icons. This is more about setting things up into the frameworks. You can add images. I think you can actually just copy and paste an image if there's something that you really want to put in, like Mike just placed it in Terrestrial Ecosystems of Canada. So that could form a great starting point for how we think about what the regions are. Are we going by these ecotones or ecozones, or are we going by jurisdictional boundaries? And then within that, so images would be great. I pasted a few images just below that kind of talk a bit about this area and some of the culture and natural heritage history that is a part of Alberta in this region. I'm not quite sure what any of these other things do. I think the most effective tools will be these sticky notes. So you can just grab one, whatever color you want, you click on it and it drops one in. You can zoom in, type whatever you want. Mountains, you can stretch it, make it bigger if you'd like. You can change the font and size if you'd like. And then when you pull it out, you can just start placing things wherever you want. And I think if you actually just double click, another sticky note will appear for you to fill in.
And for that map, just to interrupt quickly, for that map that I posted, I literally just drag and dropped an image from one window in my browser into it, and it allowed me to locate it and rescale it. So feel free to sketch with us as we go.
Yeah, so lots of possibilities. I think what we can do is give everybody some free time here to explore the interface, get connected first. We're starting to see some people. Andrea's here, Michael is here, Chelsea is here, and I'm here. But we'd hope that others can join and start exploring the interface. We'll maybe give everybody, I don't know, let's say, by the time everyone gets in here and starts to populate things and give it some thought, let's go with like a 10 to 15 minute window here to start exploring the interface, dropping some sticky notes down, exploring the charter on the left hand side, and then we'll see where we're at, and we can start to go through some of the notes that have been posted and get some perspective on this. And by all means, we're all connected through the audio to the Zoom chat. So please, if you have thoughts, just let your mic rip, and we'll just love to have a dialogue as we go. So thanks everyone for joining, and we hope that we can get some good conversation and notes posted.
Hey Matt, this is Mala here. Sorry, I'm
Hi,
still
Mala.
unable to figure out how to get into the system and post anything.
Sure. Why don't I'll send you an email, Mala, with the link.
Hi, Matt. This is Barb Sheehan too. I'm not figuring out how to do it either. Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the first link in the chat, if I'm not mistaken, and then you just had to sign in. Todd just reposted it. Thank you, Todd.
Okay. I can, well, I can post it in a sticky note too. But it's a lot of numbers to type out. That's probably not going to work for anyone. If anyone's having any issues, just send me a.
In Feedloop, I also put it in the chat box in Feedloop for the session chat. If you're looking in the Feedloop side and you're not in the full version, it's available through the Feedloop on the right hand side next to the video. You may have to come out of full screen to see it though.
So Matt, one way we could also do it is just sort of just talk about the different areas. And then you or I can just populate stickies as well for those folks who are still getting oriented. But we can give people a couple more minutes and then try that if it doesn't work.
Yeah. I think there's about 16 people in here now. So
That's great.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of the people that were connected. So. It's great to drop this in, Mike. It really, I think we all recognize that landscapes don't recognize political boundaries, and so when we start to think about how distinct some of the places are within Alberta, we know that inherently it's what kind of crafts our identity in a way. That we, in my mind, inherently we're thinking about very, very different places and very different ways that we interact as people with those different places, and as our cultures have evolved into those different places. So how do we address each one of those? Do we address it in a broad regional charter within our boundaries, or do we address it within, do we address it with the Prairies Charter? Do we address it with a Boreal Plains Charter? And how do we then start to engage with those other jurisdictions that share those ecozones across Saskatchewan and into Manitoba with the prairies, across Saskatchewan into BC and Manitoba with that boreal plains. And as we start to get into the north, how do we address our northern climates? Is it something that we want to take on as Alberta and engage that conversation with our neighboring associations? Is it something that we want to take on as ourselves and craft first, and then start to talk with our adjacent associations to sign on? Or how early do we want to begin that dialogue? And I think it starts to.
Yeah, and I should mention too, this is just one sketch of like terrestrial ecozones. Also, Alberta uses typically the ecoregions of Alberta. So there's a bunch of different even organizational systems of how we break up our landscape that we may want to discuss. But I really like some of the recognition that landscapes know no boundaries, but governments do respect boundaries. So there's a lot of policies, and the way we manage them does change significantly at the border. I think Cypress Hills is a great example. It's an interprovincial park where you are starting to see collaboration between different governments, as well as Waterton and Glacier as an international peace park is a great example of a cross-national border recognizing a management unit for a landscape. So lots of opportunities here.
Right. Yeah, and I think this is one way of viewing the land from a vegetated aspect, but also we all know what goes into the establishment of those different vegetation types in terms of aspect, slopes, and climates, and everything is related to that. But it's one way of kind of viewing the land. There's many different ways of viewing the land. First Nations view the land a lot differently than we would view the land, and how how should those values be incorporated? We know it has to be, and we know we have to enter into those discussions, and ways of knowing. And so is there different frameworks that we need to look at the charter within? watershed scales. That's an interesting idea for setting regional boundaries. I think what's also important to consider in this exercise is what is what is our purpose behind this, and there's going to be multiple purposes. I think part of it is to have something that we can all be a part of, and that we, as we sign on to this, there's an agreement amongst ourselves that these are our values. These are this is what matters. This is how we should work with the land. There's also an advocacy component to this as well. Something that we can share with others that are involved in change on the land, others that political tools as well. When we start to advocate for ourselves as a profession, that we can stand behind and provide this charter as an understanding of this place and how we should be working within it and what our values are. So as we start to think about that, to think about the audience and the tool that this becomes, how does that affect parts of the points that we're trying to pull out here today? This is great. Look at all this activity. you also want to add another question that you'd like people to respond to, you can just grab these larger stickies, make another section, and people can start to respond to it. How's everybody doing? Do we want to take another, say 9-10 minutes and get all our thoughts out by 2 o'clock, and then I can comb through and just go through what's underneath each topic and see if there's anything that comes up that people want to elaborate on or discuss. I'm going to take silence as agreement. Okay, it's 2 o'clock, everyone. If you want to keep posting a few things here, I think what I can do is actually summon, I think, and get everybody to follow me along. Okay. Now, is everybody following how I zoom around? Is that working for you, Mike? You seeing what I'm seeing?
Yeah, that's working.
Okay. So I'll just go through and zoom in and talk about each one of these. If anybody has any points they want to add as they come to anything you might have posted or that anybody else's post are intriguing to you, and you want to elaborate on it or add another point, then please go ahead. But I'll just read through it and see where that takes us. So what are our regional landscapes? So yes, landscapes don't recognize political boundaries, but how do policies affect those landscapes? But they may reflect them in how they're managed, historical influence, etc. Exactly. Physical, natural, ecological, watersheds, overlays, cultural, historic overlays, geopolitical boundaries. Yes, all the different ways that we can dissect and view the land. Perhaps an iterative approach, Alberta, then engage with BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Yukon, Northwest Territories. It's great. How can we think about ecotones, the fuzzy boundaries between all of these things? Yes. Overlay natural with cultural use, watershed scales. Yeah, absolutely. Mountains, prairies, badlands, foothills, rural agriculture, urban centers, indigenous landscapes. And then Mike's got, I'm assuming this is you, Mike, posted in the natural subregions. So the complexity that exists with the diversity of places and aspects and landforms and soils that we have in our province. I think looking at this, we start to see that it's very broad in the way that we can conceptualize our regional landscapes. We can think about it as a distinct, these ecozones, or we can think about it from a more of a political or geographic extent, but that it will cross boundaries. I think what I see is we are generally recognizing features in the land versus boundaries of Lacombe or Red Deer. Those aren't how we think of regions. We think of regions as defined by natural features, and I think that'll be an important theme that we carry through to the definition of how we want to conceptualize what our regional charter is, or how we maybe even start to break it down into multiple distinct regional charters. So who belongs to our regional landscape and who should be the signatories? Are we inviting allied disciplines? So the Alberta Association of Architects works closely with other prairie associations. Should we do the same? Yeah, there's the reference I have is the Prairie Design Awards. I'm not sure how much deeper it goes than that, but absolutely. First Nation groups, absolutely. Engineers, absolutely. Planners, architects, provincial government, absolutely. Building quality and architecture, environmentalists, historians, municipalities, tourism organizations. Fantastic, yes. Community, rural community associations, spokespeople. SALT, I'm not sure what SALT is. land trust organizations. Thank you. Southern Alberta Land Trust. There we go. Thanks, Andrea. Educational academic groups, universities, ARPA, Lanta, very interested in how nursery trades will help us adapt to climate change. Great point. Biologists, climate change researchers, universities, universal design specialists, yes. Conservancies, important for the protection and restoration. Yes, these are great. I think Parks Canada, absolutely. Alberta Environment, these large stakeholders that have an influence over the way that we conceptualize landscapes, or they're the ones that have authority to make change, and we need to work with them and influence them to see our perspectives and to be on board with how we want to encourage change and encourage stewardship of the land. So part of the question, I think, becomes how do we, at what point in the process do we start to engage with these other jurisdictions? Do they become, or these authorities, do they become signatories? Do they become stakeholders that we consult as we move through the process? Are there landscape architects within these organizations that we can reach out to? Or do we have, what connections do we have within these organizations that we can pull into this conversation? So what do we feel is important to our natural heritage was another question. And cultural heritage, yes, that's over here. Maintaining historical waterways, landforms, etc. The authenticity of this place, wildlife corridors, ecosystems and geological structures, archaeological routes, unique landscapes of Drumheller Dinosaur Provincial Park. Yes, absolutely. Preserving undeveloped natural landscapes and working with agriculture and industry to do so. Yes. Yes, I have a similar point. Conservation and enhancement of urban ecological systems. Some of these remnant spaces, remnant ecosystems that find themselves within and surrounded by urban development, making sure that those are preserved. Stewardship, yes, maintaining genetic diversity, allow for adaptation to climate change and other stresses, I'm assuming that is. Enhancing biodiversity and mitigating human impacts on the land. Soils, landform, the diversity of ecosystems, unique climates and microclimates within the province. The impact of Alberta's vast natural resources on shaping our land and communities. I think that's a huge component of this. Yes. How are our natural resource industries influencing not only just the present day functioning of the landscape and regions economically, socially, environmentally, and how will the long-term restoration or reclamation of the work that we're doing within that natural resource extraction, what will that look like, and how will that shape the way we utilize the land and live with it? Connections, regional connections, human nature, ecosystem services, spaces and attributes, characteristics and experiences, natural heritage and future legacy. So what is important to our cultural heritage? Exploration, discovery, recognizing our history, our built forms, including monuments, landscapes, and memorials, immigrant history and storytelling. Yes, there's a huge component of that here. It's very recent too. Ranching history, Indigenous culture, outdoor recreation, national and provincial parks, nature and ecology-based education and learning. Vibrant urban plazas and parks, yes. When we think of our landscapes, they are not just what we see in Banff and the foothills, they are our cities as well. Acknowledging past mistakes. Settlement, how CPR influenced our current settlement patterns and early players. Yes. Indigenous knowledge of the land, our relationships with the land, equitable division of urban space. Storytelling in a compelling and accessible manner. Design for all seasons and wintry use as a primary consideration. That's great, absolutely. We need to think about how we exist at all times in this space and what that means for the way that we work within it, the way that we design our cities, our places, and provide access to it. The New Zealand Charter does a good job of recognizing treaties and Maori values. Great, a great one to look at as a reference. Influence on our collective identity. Experience and creation of memory. Equitable and inclusive access. Oh, all of this good stuff. Okay. What are our values, principles, and policies? So someone here has posted the conference, the Asia Pacific region, declaring that every country of the Asia Pacific region should have a law in place for the landscape architecture profession. They support the education programs for landscape architecture. Associations should have a registration system for landscape architects, which is endorsed by the government in each country. The Asia Pacific region and IFLA declares its support of the International Landscape Convention. Great. From the Australian Charter, value our landscape, protect, enhance, regenerate, design with respect, design for the future, embrace responsive design. Educating the public clients on this focus to our work. Professional ethics to be good stewards of the land. Reclaiming the natural landscape in harmony with nature. Ensuring sustainable and accessible landscape management. Stewardship. Ensuring public safety. But what about the safety of other living organisms? Yes. We are the ones influencing the direction, asking the question, what important groups are not at the table, and the privilege we hold in influencing the landscape. Absolutely. We start to think about who do we need to talk to, who are those folks that don't get us a seat at the table, and how do we connect with them and understand their values and how their values can get incorporated into this. Protection of our water resources, recognition of diversity, people and places, creating sustainable, valuable public space for all Albertans to benefit from. Ongoing professional growth and adaptability, protection, resource and enhancement of habitat, resiliency, holistic and long-term perspective, promoting understanding of and appreciation for our landscapes, embracing multidisciplinary approach and maintaining collaboration with related disciplines, placemaking, inclusivity. It's great. Nature has an intrinsic value. What is the relationship between the Charter and the Canadian Landscape Charter? That's a good question. I think from my perspective, this is something that gets, this Charter, that whatever it becomes, if we create something out of this process, which I hope we do, would reference that Canadian Landscape Charter in many ways and build upon it to be a bit more specific to this place. Reconciliation. We have one other idea. Thinking about the audience, if a charter were to be used as a political tool, would it have more weight if it included others? Saskatchewan and BC. Yes. Something way up in the corner. And whether urban adaptive plant communities will be considered. So I did add another question down here below. What should our next steps be? Who wants to get involved? I added a few things here: define our regions, define our partners, establish a committee, build opportunities to collaborate, learn, share. We have a lot of great connections. I think it just comes down to networking and sharing those contacts. Yes, it does. It comes down to initiative and those willing to take on responsibility for moving this forward. Okay, so I think I can stop following. I don't know. I'm gonna stop following, or I don't know exactly how that works. Sorry. But just take the opportunity here now. If people can keep putting notes down. There really isn't another set piece of the program for today. This has really been about exploring our thoughts around what a regional landscape charter could mean that's initiated by the AALA, figuring out what our values are, what should be included in this, just what our general thoughts are around that, and then determining some next steps. And I don't really know what the overall next steps are to this, but I'm sure we can take some lessons from the CSLA in terms of how they went about structuring or developing the Canadian Landscape Charter. But this is also something that's very specific to us and specific to our region, so it can take on its own process. But it does take people willing to contribute. I'm certainly on board with this, and I think Michael is as well. But I think we're going to need more people to help us digest and set the direction and help to facilitate further conversations around this. Like you say, we all have connections, we have networks that we can use to build this out and pull people together and have conversations. So to me, that's really the next steps. I think from the board's perspective, we'll, Michael and I and any others that are interested will take this away and start to pull out themes like we would do for any engagement, and report back to the board, at least, as to how this is moving along, and start to progress this over the next year. Not sure how long this is going to take to put it together. It depends on the scope that we want it to take on. But I think there's a lot of value in what we've been able to pull together here today, and a lot of value in what the outcome of this could be. So I'd like to thank you for attending and putting down your ideas, and really I'm going to stop talking and open up the floor to anybody else who would like to say anything.
I guess I have a question about the landscape charter in general. Like, most of these themes are addressing our notion of natural landscapes, but we don't really talk about what landscape architects are doing in urban realms at all. Is that the focus of the charter? It's like protecting landscapes.
I think the focus is what we want it to be. I think the focus is on what's important to us as stewards of the land, and in the broadest sense. Land. A wise man once told me landscape architecture is everything, and I genuinely believe it. So it considers everything. It considers our cities, our towns, our agricultural lands, considers our natural lands. So all of that can be stitched together into this charter that really will help us define and define for others what it is that and how we should be interacting with it and working with it, and what the future is that we're striving for it to be. Does that make sense, Ellie?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that a lot of the notions put forward here talked about the natural landscape.
Yeah, I think it's I was just going to say it's an interesting nuance, kind of stewards of the land and stewards of landscapes, and how the two play together. And maybe there's, if our charter is dealing with stewardship of landscapes, perhaps there's opportunities to have a reciprocal relationship with other organizations who are currently stewards of the land. And maybe we don't actually, maybe the land is a component of what we do, but maybe it's about a bigger picture, and it's about a mutual, or developing these relationships with others who haven't already invested significant time and energy and resources in building their base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point too, Andrea. And I think we think about it as on like all aspects of urban and rural and natural territories. And I think there's a lot of people that, besides landscape architects, that steward the land and have an influence on it. Architects, planners, ranchers, politicians, all have an influence on it. And are we trying to get them to sign on to the same charter, or trying to get their input into what this could be? Should this be the vehicle to influence their approach to the land as well? We think about it as landscape architects, and we all, I think, I don't know, have these glossy-eyed vision of what the land is, and but it's messy too, right? And there's a lot of poor influences on it. And so how do we engage those poor influences and see if we can change that in some way?
Yeah, and I mean, even just how you describe it, this is obviously something that would be a really important exercise to go through, and a process for us all to go through kind of collectively, right? As much as the product at the end, but it could also be, if we were to broaden and engage other perspectives and people who perhaps have gone through similar processes, to kind of leverage their experience, but very much an engagement tool. And so at the end of it, we not only have a point in time landscape charter that has greater buy-in, and isn't, such a kind of insular product, but we have the start of these relationships with other groups, and just being able to build some kind of momentum and additional capacity around land and landscape stewardship could be really interesting.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andrea. I think the process could be very interesting and enlightening, hopefully, for everyone involved and others that don't necessarily see the world through the perspective of a landscape architect.
Matt, I wanted to chime in as well. I think that's a good point, but I think we need to be cautious on how far we look to reach with this, in that there's so many different perspectives and stakeholders in terms of how we use the land. I think if we try to do too much, we might land up just going in circles and chasing our tail. It's not to say that it's not a valuable exercise. It definitely is. We need to make sure that we're very clear on our objectives, our audience, and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all know that engagement can get out of hand at times, and you lose track of what your true purpose was, and maybe the engagement becomes just a point in time. I could see a great conversations happening with the AAA and the PEGA, around what we're trying to achieve with this and what we're doing with it, and then that becomes as much an advocacy piece and kind of campaign for our values as it is about understanding their associations' perspectives on what their their scope is and their engagement with the land is.
I think, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, I was having some audio issues before. It's a really great point, Will, and I think the sort of IFLA example of how they started to tackle a global convention, kind of fell on its face a little bit because of the sort of challenges of trying to bite off too much at once. I'm just thinking maybe this is a situation where version 1 of the charter is generated by our members for our association, and then versions 2, 3, 4, each time we try and cast a wider net. So we create a bit of a foundation, and then as we slowly kind of cast that wider net, we start to change some of the values and adjust them to some of the new signatories and things like that. But I think it does make sense to kind of start small and follow that kind of grassroots bottom-up approach that the other component associations have done. What's also good about the first little piece of it being, if it is entirely within our association or some of our allied component associations like BC or say Saskatchewan, Manitoba, is we can start to also kind of direct the profession a little bit too, so we can be a little more specific about landscape architects. And that's why I posted that one excerpt from the Shanghai Declaration, where essentially they were just saying, you need a practice act or a title act or some form of professional designation, which we have. So we're kind of on the way already in some respects with the work that we've already done in the past few years. So Todd, I don't know if you're around, Todd. I wrote a little chat there just asking if you could maybe give a quick overview of how this might turn into an actual kind of official initiative. There's an idea of a subcommittee or a task force. Do we need a board? Do we need this under a board portfolio? Like, what are your thoughts on how to make this happen?
Well, the theme over the whole weekend is really going to be about the idea that our HR capacity, in terms of me being the HR, is pretty much at capacity. So a lot of this new stuff is really going to be about an impassioned group willing to take it on and move the ball forward. Because a lot of the early work here is really going to be about that thinking piece and that writing it down and hashing out the language and really conceptually bringing that forward. So I think to me, the next right step is going to be to identify, a committee, small or large, that is willing to work at this sort of for the next several months, and then bring it back again. Probably, I would say, to me, a reasonable timeline might be to bring back something for endorsement next year at the AGM. Because that gives it a year. I mean, obviously there's no firm commitment to that in terms of a timeline, but that's the idea I think it needs next, is an impassioned group with a chair that's willing to sort of QB that. Now, whether that's the board, past presidents or presidents-elect, or some other board portfolio sort of takes lead, or at least liaison, is probably a good idea. But to me, the right first step is to identify a group that's committed to moving this forward, with a chair that's going to kind of quarterback that. Obviously, we have the technology, and if it needs some resourcing, the budget's not finalized until we're not finalizing that till December. So we'd have time to add some resources if we felt it needed some cash as well. But to me, that's the next step. And it might be, knowing that you folks still have kind of half an hour in the schedule, it might be worthwhile, if there is a group within the room that feels like this is a project that they can get passionate about and support, it might be worthwhile to have those people sort of stay on for a bit and have a conversation about what that looks like. The other thing we've added to this year's business meeting AGM tomorrow at 3 is we've added a new business section. So if there is a small group that's sort of willing to commit some time and resources to this in their lives, that want to bring forward a motion to seek the membership endorsement, we have built a section for that this weekend. A lot of the sessions may have a need for sort of a broader membership heads up or endorsement or support to really feel validated. So we've added a section where those can be added as we build them over the weekend. So if there's a group and they want to put forward a motion to support the creation of a regional charter. We have a place for that on the agenda. So that group would need to sort of craft that motion and bring it to Matt or Mike or I, so we can get that crafted into the PowerPoint for tomorrow. And then of course they would need to be prepared to speak to it a little bit as well. But that to me is probably the next best step for a lot of the new committees this weekend, is to really figure out who's going to be involved, get some names on paper that are willing to play this, to move it forward. And then to start to get that into a more structured process. If we've got time to do some of it today, that's great. Otherwise, we definitely need to commit to a follow-up next meeting.
Okay. So is there anyone on the call today that isn't Todd or myself or Matt that would want to make a motion tomorrow in new business that's able to attend the AGM?
Possibly.
So
So
it's a motion.
enthusiastic, Andrea.
Yeah. It's not a commitment to, sign your life away and work on it for a year. It's
Yeah.
just, is this something that we want to let our members aware of?
Pursue, yeah.
As an individual who's kind of coming into the president role after president-elect and has been involved, I think one of the things that I'd like our association to focus on for 2021 is more membership involvement. And that will include calls to folks who don't come to events like this. So that the 40 or so of you that are here today, it's amazing.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's the usual suspects. So it'd be great if we could get some new blood into the volunteer membership. And maybe this is an initiative that might attract people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good way to engage,
Yeah.
a group for sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. Thanks for giving that overview, Todd. That's really helpful. You understand this stuff better than Matt or I think. I won't speak on Brian's behalf because he seems to know how everything works. He's been around for a long time.
Brian here? Brian make it?
I don't think he did. Final questions or comments from the audience, our participants? Andrea said, great session in the chat. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was great. Cool tool, Matt. Mural is pretty neat. Yeah, I like how that worked out.
We'll use it tomorrow again in the branding session.
Cool.
Before people start to all run away, the one thing, this is the first group that went through this. So if you figured out a tip or a trick to get today's session to really work well, if you could take 10 seconds and zap me off just a quick email, I'm going to do a session right first thing tomorrow before we get going, sort of on how to make the most of this software throughout the day. Obviously, the switching over to Zoom to interact is a big thing. But if you figured out other stuff, especially if you're working off an iPad or a tablet or a phone, if you could just send me a quick 1-sentence email telling me what you figured out so that I can start to collect that data and share it with everyone to enrich tomorrow's experience. We're at about 150 in person, not counting those just coming to the business meetings. So it'll be a big day. And for the most of the day, I'm running multiple sessions. If you go on Instagram, you'll see how my office is set up for the next couple of days. It'll give you a sense of what this looks like from the back end. But anything you learned would be helpful to help everyone else.
So Todd, I've got just a real easy one. If you could maybe send out an email or target just the Calgary.ca folks. Our corporate security policies prevent us from using Zoom, so let people know, forward it to your own personal email and sign on from your own machine or your phone. Critical, although FeedLoop might let you through, right? We don't know.
I think that's also similar to St. Albert, and maybe Sharif, you can speak if that's true to the city of Edmonton as well.
Let's assume yes.
Yes. Would you say again, please?
Oh, are you guys able to access Zoom on your City of Edmonton devices?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
But for City of Edmonton, we officially use Google Meets, which is more official and more secure to use. Yeah.
Matt, final closing comments?
Well, thanks. Yeah, just echo the thanks, the big thanks for everybody here. It's impressive to see the folks that came out. Really appreciate getting involved in this at the beginning. and hope that we can see some of you continue through and continue to add some thoughts to this. I'm sure we'll have more check-ins as this gets developed. But yeah, if there's any keen people, as Todd said, we need more people, more keeners. So please reach out. But thanks again, and we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Todd, for setting everything up. Bye.
So long, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for the time.
Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks.